Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube, you will see a little link down below. You can click on that and end up in Zoom. If you end up in Zoom, you can click on that link and you'll end up in Makana. And there you can ask questions. You can ask those questions, vote on those questions, and become one of the producers actually running this show because we basically are just answering your questions. So those questions are really important for you to ask and to vote on. We spend a little bit more time on the top of the hour than the bottom of the hour. We're going to try doing 2 hours of Q&A for the first hour and then another couple hours on education, which we're not streaming starting at 9 o'clock. So we're a little late. I know that the emails have been off. This week has been a little hectic. So but we'll be doing that today. We'll see how that goes. We'll see where it all ends up in that process. If you think you can answer the questions, then come in early, 6:40 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. You can do the mic check with all of us. If you're not sure, you can come in at 6 and see what's going on and hang out and test your system and see if you're ready to go. All right, let's jump into the questions. Bill, what do we got?
Thank you, Alex. The first one comes from our own TJ Asher, and he says the last few days, the AV sync on the YouTube has been amazingly bad. Bill seemed to be the only one in sync on Friday, but his video was stuttery. What is the cause of this? Do we have any idea?
We don't know yet. It has something to do with the screen scraping that we're doing, that we're trying to do that will increase the resolution. But for some reason in that process, we're losing sync, and it does seem like we're jumping a little bit. And, we're going to test a couple different things. One is we're going to try doing it. It was working in our tests from the Mac, and for some reason it's not working as well from the PC as a participant. So a lot of other systems seem to work. It just seems to be that configuration isn't working. So we're going to, again, try to use a Mac and have a more direct route. So we're going to also get rid of Dante, in the mix. It is the part that concerns us the most is the fact that Bill yesterday was in sync and everyone else was out of sync, which means it's not consistent. And so that's the part we don't understand is how it's doing that. So there's some kind of function there that isn't working, and we're trying to work through it. And we'll probably the next couple weeks will be us fiddling around with a lot of those things. And we may back up into the regular one as we figure it out. If we don't feel like we have a solution that's working by the end of Monday, we'll probably go back to the Zoom streaming until we figure out what is actually causing that issue. So we may start streaming in parallel again to figure it out instead of inflicting bad sync on everyone for a week while we figure it out. Anyway, so we'll stay tuned on that one. But we're not sure what it is. We've noticed it. We're paying attention to it. We just can't figure out what part of the pipeline is having that problem, and especially because it's not consistent. That's the part we have the most. But we do know that in general, the Zoom setup is a little bit wonky as far as how it handles audio and video, and so we're just trying to figure out how to tie that all back together. Next question
comes to us from Perry Miller in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Perry says the Daring Fireball WWWDC 2021 show was shot using iPhone 12 Pro Max. For many, beyond cost considerations, why would one look elsewhere for a Zoom camera? How do you set it up to use the phone as a camera but use an iPad as the monitor?
Go ahead, Carl.
So Filmic Pro, who we had Tim on before. So Filmic Pro is the best way. A lot of us have phones hooked into ATEM right now using Filmic Pro if we want to show people around our little studios. And as far as using the iPad as a monitor, if you're running the beta, which I'm guessing he was, he could have been doing the streaming, so you could use that as like a side chain.
Yep, go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, and I'm hoping with iOS 15 coming out that when they're doing the multi-movement monitors where you can use one in multiple, you'll be able to put that iPhone and iPad together for that.
Yeah, I actually think that the iPhone does look better than like, for instance, a standard webcam. It doesn't look as good as something like a 6K or a Sony 6300 or what many of us use for our cameras. So it's not going to compete with that. But as far as competing with a webcam, absolutely. The big problem is that then you have to set up your webcam. You have to set up your iPhone or buy another iPhone, which is a lot more expensive than a webcam, or you constantly be putting your thing together. Part of what makes what we do, for a lot of us, what makes it work is that we just sit down and do it. And we don't have to figure out, how to put our phone in and get it set up and get it wired in. So the ease of use is the reason you may not still use it. But for the folks that have been using their iPhones, I think in the last 2 or 3 versions look significantly better. I mean, I don't know what the number is now, but I know that a couple of years ago there was some 60 Minutes thing, and they mentioned that there were 200 engineers at Apple only working on the camera. so there, that's so there's Apple has more resources to work on the camera than anyone else in the world at the moment. So yeah, the phone camera is going to keep on moving away from everything else in the small sensor size world. Go ahead, Beju.
Yeah, just adding to what Carl said about Filmic Pro, I'll just add that you need that if you're doing an HDMI into a capture card. Yes, Filmic Pro is the best option, and you can use Filmic Remote on another phone or an iPad to control it. If you were to go straight into the Mac, Camo is probably the most stable and the most control, gives you the most control, and it connects directly over a lightning cable, so it's very stable.
That's great. Go ahead, Jesse.
Just with what you're saying in regard to the quality of the iPhone camera, I've got the iPhone 11s and not even the latest, and the image quality in video is so good that even though I own the Blackmagic 6K, my wife doesn't get it. She doesn't know why I bought that camera, because I cannot produce something as good as the iPhone. I know a lot of it is skill level too, and applying LUTs and all that. But wow, I mean, Apple has really done something.
Yeah, if you turn and to be fair, Samsung and Google, I mean, a lot of their stuff looks really, really good as well. If you're not taking full advantage of the 6K camera, shooting in log or raw, taking advantage of the lenses, all those things are things that you have to do, or you're absolutely right. It will not look better in a standard. If you don't have the right lenses or aren't shooting in raw, it probably isn't going to compete very well with the phone as far as ease of use. And there's a ton of stuff when I do little trainings on how to build our kits. I just use my iPhone. I don't pick up a big, it's light and fast, and I can cut something together really, really quickly. Go ahead, Charles.
And the magic that Apple and Samsung that they're doing is a lot of the processing that's happening instantly on the phone to expose, balance, know where the skin tone is going to sit. A lot of that is the magic that you're experiencing, which is what technology is supposed to be. It's supposed to be invisible.
Right.
And that's where they've hit it.
And the term that really describes is computational photography. We're not actually, it's not actually what the sensor sees. It is all the things that are doing to process it. Next question.
Moving on, JJ McKenna, who's often here in the panel with us from Santa Venetia, California, says, is there a reliable light meter that could measure the ambient light in a room scene that would allow Charles to build LUTs for Blackmagic design camera users?
Go ahead, Carl.
So if you're going to get a light meter, you can just get a cheaper one if you just need to tell Charles what it is as far as the ambient light in the room. Soconic is one of the better ones. This is all you'd really need. As far as light meter, there are some more fancier ones, but this is a really good start for a lot of people.
Go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, exactly what Carl said. And also remember, if you're able to look at your SDR 709 waveform, skin tone sits around 400. If you're lighter skin, sits about a stop, maybe a stop and a half above that. And if you're that sexy chocolate, it sits about half a stop or a full stop below that. So that's your average that we use on film sets, because the main thing that you want to do, especially for this, it's about skin tone and the face. Like everything else, you can work around, but you want to get the face as much of the detail and the range just for the skin tone, and then it makes things a lot easier.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, the other thing is that it's hard to just have a meter that tells what the number is for someone to build a LUT. What they really need to see is the image, an image of you, an image of a and possibly of a, because it really is something that's, you need more detail there typically than just the measurement. Next question.
I would argue with Charles at a certain age, I don't want a lot of detail. Anyway, exactly. Moving on, Paul Wallace of Austin, Texas, is in with what are the pros and cons of buying a Mac M1 Mini now versus waiting for the new models? Same with other Apple products.
Go ahead, Carl.
If you buy an M1 now, you have an M1 now. We don't know where the new one's going.
That's the advantage. I mean, you just have to look at whether it's going to do what you want it to do, and if it's powerful enough to do what you need, and you have an immediate need for it. It's not back ordered right now, so you can order those things as needed. So if you have something to use it for, I wouldn't buy it as an investment that you're hoping that it's going to turn out better later. It's not. It's not. You have to amortize it. I mean, usually when I'm buying a computer these days, I want it to amortize in a year. Like that I will get the value out of it in a year, so that I might keep it longer, but I have to get that because of how fast this is moving now. Go ahead, TJ.
As with all tools, if you need the tool, buy the tool. If you don't need the tool, wait. You may never need the tool.
Right. Next question.
Comes from Felipe Baez, our friend in the in Prague, Czechia. What's the panel's opinion on the Behringer Wing to be used on live video events on a Dante-enabled network? Several PCs with Audinate's DVS and a few Macs. The basics would be able to create mix minuses for everyone and extra routes.
Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, so if you're using the Wing, it's going to be really good, especially using Dante. So essentially, you've got 16 stereo buses that you can create mix minuses on. You've got an extra 8 matrix buses you can create mix minuses on, and you've even got 4 output buses you can also create mix minuses on, and send them straight back out to Dante. The 16 buses are all stereo, so you can actually do mix minuses for stereo as well. So it's not just a mono. It has a lot of routing power. So if you're not going to use it for like a live front of house, you're just going to use it in like a live streaming, it is actually quite good because you've got 28 total mix buses that you can put mix minuses on.
It looks really great. So this is kind of their next generation. I mean, this is what steps above the X32s that we're all kind of used to. So
OSC control.
It does have OSC control.
Complete OSC control on every dial, everything. It's quite amazing.
And both directions. Coming and going, so you could. So that's where, and X32 has that too. That's where Andy and I are eventually going to work on getting control, just like what you guys did for the Yamaha boards.
This is a pretty big deal.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So the Flow 8 is kind of like, so the X32 has been kind of the main solution from Behringer for the last decade. I'd say almost a decade at least. And it really feels like this is, they went down with the Flow 8 to something less expensive that we can all, that has what they think that we need, and then up with the Wing, to go the other direction. And it looks really, really powerful. I wish there was I have to admit, I mean, I like the sliders and everything, but I wish that it was there was a rack mountable version. That's what, but it does look really fascinating. Go ahead, Victor.
The super inexpensive Flow 8 first 2 channels are the same preamps as the Wing.
Right. And how many analog inputs does the Wing have?
Okay, so
go ahead, Carl.
So on the back, it's the same as the X32. So the back panel will look very similar to an X32, a full-size X32. Mm-hmm. So 32 and 16 out. But it's going to be more used for the breakout boxes. So there it is. So from the bottom, it actually looks like an X32 when you look at it. It has a different card structure though. So and it looks like
they really backed up, and the software for it is the next generation as well. I mean, they kind of fell into the last software. They bought it from somebody else. Someone else had developed the software to it. So this also sounds like is a much more kind of thought out process. Do we think that this is kind of a direct competitor or something like a QL1?
It's a new paradigm. Because they don't, it's not a channel input. It's not like you're sending channel 1 to output or bus 3. It's sources. So you can actually have channel 1 to 8 being your drums. And those drums will then go into a single bus. Right. And every input, so it has 48 inputs, but each input is either mono or stereo. You don't have to say, okay, it's 24 stereo, 48 mono. It's not like that. It's just 48 inputs. They can either be mono or stereo. 48 is the total.
Interesting. Victor?
And the DSP is much, much more powerful on the Wing than it is on the X32 chain.
Interesting. Very interesting. Next question.
Carmi Vajzovic is up next here on the panel some days. Has anyone who has not a professional in this space before they started watching Office Hours since gotten a professional gig as a result of your time spent here? Interesting question.
Anyone in the panel? Yeah, go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, I suppose my profession beforehand was running a venue, and Office Hours helped because we were already doing streaming and lots of different things, but Office Hours really helped us scale. So now we're helping or running an extra festival per month on average, and it's been quite, Office Hours has been an amazing help to do that.
That's great, fantastic. Next question.
JJ McKenna, Santa Venetia, California, here in the panel sometimes. The panel mentioned some good mute controllers in the pre-show. Could they share some of those noiseless options?
Go ahead, Rupert.
For Zoom or web conferencing, the most reliable one is a mouse on the mute button.
Yes, yeah, I will say that that is the case. Go ahead, Craig.
One thing that was mentioned, something I picked up on a while ago, but I think in the panel previously, Jason was the one who's talking about it, is mapping it to a keyboard key, not their standard one. I use the F19, which is what the discussion was, and having it as a global, it's always there. It's real easy.
You go ahead, Bill.
I use a Rolls MS-111 mic switch. I like the fact that it's really heavy. It sits on a desk well and doesn't skate around as you press it. So that's what I use every day here on office hours.
I'm going to let you take this real quick. I have an unusual call and I just have to check out real quick.
Sure. We'll dive into the next one. Anybody else have any mic mute suggestions? We had actually a long and interesting discussion of it this morning. TJ, you want to jump in on that? And then Jeffrey.
Yeah, just to the F19 key or the global hotkey in Zoom. With my own particular situation, I'm using Windows through remote desktops, and that still functions even when I'm in a Windows session.
Yeah, it's actually the kind of topic that we tend to go to in our pre-shows, and we had a long discussion of it this morning. Jeffrey Powers, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I have Stream Deck mutes, but I always go for my mouse because it's the closest thing to being able to hit it. And then the other thing is, there were a ton of them on Etsy, from old joystick button looking ones to ones that are a little bit more professional looking. X-Keys also has one too. That's one, though I think that's the one that we're seeing right now. But keep in mind, USB, especially into a hub, that's another USB bus. That's another little bit of power, and it might not always work the way that you want it to.
Yeah, John Idelson had one that was really nice and kind of like looked custom and looked wood. And we were talking about, is it available in other wood finishes? I guess there's a ton of mute buttons available out there. So look around a little. Maybe you'll find something you like. Let's move on to JJ McKenna's next question from Santa Venetia, California. When Taylor was cutting yesterday, whenever he had two people pinned, the resolution was terrible, but then would return to 1080 whenever a single person was on screen. Is this normal behavior for Zoom? It's too bad Alex isn't here to deal with that, because he watches very, very closely. But Beju, you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, it's come up before as well, that I think Alex had, actually, I think probably we didn't tell Taylor not to do that too much, because Alex had mentioned it before, not to do it, because you're only getting the 360 for both of the windows rather than the full 1080 for that, I think, when you do multi-spotlight. Yeah, I think it came up earlier when we were doing Zoom OSC testing as well at that time as well, doing multi-pins and multi-spots. That seems to be a limitation in Zoom right now.
Yeah, plus Alex has been doing all this extra stuff, bringing in the super sources and everything. And I think we're just trying to figure out what are the potential causes of things interrupting the flow of the show. I know he's working very hard on making this the best show on the internet in terms of its technical operations. And hang on a second, I've been pinned now, which means I can't see the gallery, which means I can't pick on people for questions. And also I need to get to Jeffrey has a hand up. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, Taylor and I talked about it afterwards. It's because he was trying to find a way to not do the spotlight, because when you spotlight, it's like you got to turn off the spotlight, go back to gallery mode. It's a big task, and to the point where I've even sent a request into Zoom to have some sort of hotkey control for host controls. Because that would change the game on that.
Yeah, I think Alex has always mentioned that Zoom, when they were designing this, designed it for the kind of things that people normally do, and we're not in that class. Running a full-scale internet daily show off of this interface has its own little challenges. Let's move on to the next questions. I don't see any more hands. It looks like Gualberto in Santa Cruz, Bolivia says, what advantage does vmix in the cloud offer versus having local computers? In what scenario should I consider it? And lastly, why is it vmix only? Looks like Rupert McCrae wants to get in on this, and so does Chad. So let's start with Rupert and go to Chad.
So I don't know that the functionality of vmix specifically is any different in the cloud, but in the cloud in general, the general advantages of being in the cloud apply. With vmix, for example, if you found you didn't have enough horsepower, you can shut the machine down, give it more resources, boot it back up, and get on with your project.
Fair enough. Chad?
A couple of things come to mind. I can regionalize where I'm serving content from, so I can choose a region in AWS that's near all the remotes. I can exploit
greater bandwidth than I have locally at home. If I'm only on 100 megabits at home, I might have up to 25 gigabits in the cloud. The cloud machine could be much more powerful than my home machine, where if I'm hosting from home, I need a beefier machine with greater specs to be able to do that. And you can do the same with OBS. You can do the same with many other tools. It's not restricted just to vmix.
TJ, go ahead.
I think one of the reasons vmix is the thing is because most cloud services are Windows based. There's a little bit of Mac cloud services, but they're not nearly as robust and pervasive as the Windows things. So OBS or vmix tend to be the thing on Windows.
Nice. All right. Jason Sipe from Murrieta, California has our next question. He's here on the panel today, and he asks, Netflix and Amazon now consider aspect ratio a creative decision, not a technical decision. How much do you play with aspect ratios outside the usual 16:9 or 9:16? What are some typical use cases for your ratios? And Carl wants to jump in on that first.
So 16:9 is becoming a thing of documentaries. So fiction-based works like Stranger Things, The Crown, some of the biggest stuff on Netflix is now 2:1, and over on Disney Plus, their bigger shows are extreme widescreen, so Panavision, which would be like 2.39:1 or 21:9. So the 16:9 is actually disappearing as we know it from narrative works, with the exception of some documentaries that are staying in 16:9.
It's been interesting to see how this has evolved because, television obviously was 4:3 for most of TV's era, at least here in the US. I think it was pretty much the same everywhere. And then we got into everything going, quote, widescreen 16:9. And then, of course, when phones became the dominant in the hands of the biggest buying block being teenagers and above, things started going vertical. We had the square things when some of those social media sites took ascendancy. And it's interesting that we kind of live in a raster standards-less world now, and you produce whatever you want and hope that it works. TJ, your thoughts on this?
One thing people may not realize is the old TV, the 4:3 standard, often called the Academy standard, was the standard for motion picture up until about the 30s or 40s, when they started to develop bigger widescreen formats. And the change to widescreen format was to give the cinema something that the television didn't have, so that you could see this big wide. And that's why in the 60s, you got the Cinerama and CinemaScope and these just crazy super wide formats that kind of came into vogue for just a short period of time, just to differentiate the theater, the cinema experience from the home television watching experience.
It's also interesting that computer monitors often don't strictly conform. You see a lot of things that may be 3840 wide, but the vertical resolution is different than that. And I wonder if that's computer yields or something. Charles deals with this every day in his colorist work. So Charles, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so lately, the last 6 months, we've been doing a lot of commercials, beauty commercials, where we've had to tilt the entire camera rig to do verticals because the client is going to be delivering to where the consumer is going to consume, and it's mostly on their phones. So we've shot everything vertically, and it's been interesting just to have that change. But the fact that we could actually do that on the fly, it's been great. Before, it would have been a bit of a to-do, but now let's say wooden camera sells a bracket that you can literally just attach your rig to, and it can hold a good amount of weight, and you just tilt the whole thing and put it on your tripod and you're good to go. So we've been using that a lot. But
I've run into that a lot in advertising too, because particularly in the era when department stores were a big deal, to turn a camera rig to a Dutch angle, essentially make it a vertical rather than a horizontal shot. They want, particularly in fashion, all the resolution they can possibly get, because they're looking at reproducing clothing and making people say, that looks fabulous, let's go buy it off the rack right now. So it's interesting that each use case has a different raster that they fall in love with, and something as a content producer you just have to pay attention to. We'll move on to Jesse in Los Angeles, who says, what have you been most stressed out about when you join a large public Zoom, such as office hours? For me, it's like public speaking and took a while to get over it. I think you share that with a lot of people. Go ahead, TJ, your thoughts on it?
So for me, the thing that I stress over most is making sure I am muted all the time, except when I am speaking. I have become obsessed with staring at the little corner of Zoom to make sure my microphone is muted when it should be.
Okay, Chad, and then Jason. Go ahead, Chad.
Fear that comes with newness, fear that comes with being scrutinized by 150 viewers, and over the past more than a year, having grown accustomed to this group, I can think of no better place to try and buck that. And when you find the benefit of becoming comfortable speaking to these guys, it's much easier to speak to other people. It's just how much do you value being able to connect with people?
And I would just say also that everybody, you're not alone. I have been on broadcast or something like that for most of my career. The first days I was on office hours, I was almost panicky because you just don't want to mess up. It's something you haven't done before. You don't have a lot of experience with. You feel like every single thing you're going to be saying is going to be judged by quite smart, quite articulate people, and you're going to come up short. It's interesting, but it's been nice how welcoming this community is. I said we're going to go to Jason, then Rupert, then TJ after that, and then we'll finish up with Nigel. Go ahead, Jason.
This sounds really weird, but actually the technical requirements of being on here, listening to different people with different microphones, different sounds, and then also coming in with different video resolutions actually does add a little bit of stress kind of just in the background, because I have to interpolate. I have to run that, like Alex says, we have to run like CPU cycles in your head. I have to figure out who's talking to me, how they're talking to me, why they're coming to me this way, filter out any noise or garbage or anything else like that that's happening in the background. And so that kind of adds a little bit to the stress of being up on stage, as it were.
We're going to Rupert next, then TJ, then Nigel. Go ahead, Rupert.
So I know the question was about stressing when joining a call, but if you get to the point where you are hosting a call or a meeting, the set of stresses are very different. And that could be things like, is this meeting going to get Zoom bombed? Have I set up the security properly? Are my participants prepped? Are they aware of the protocols that we're going to use in this meeting? Is this going out live? And do they know how to conduct themselves?
Yeah, it's not fake stress. It's real stress because there are some stressors. TJ, go ahead, and then Nigel.
So use that stress to your advantage. That stress means you are excited about it. You are thinking about it. You want it to do well. So use that to your advantage. Use that stress to give you that little bit of extra energy that you can bring to the thing that you are doing. Don't let it freak you out. It's normal, even for professionals who go on stage day after day. Right before the curtain goes up, there's that little that kick of adrenaline, that excitement that happens. It's like, okay, we're on, and people who are experienced can take and make use of that.
I agree with that. Nigel, and then Todd's in for the last word.
Yeah, I guess the thing that stresses me out is how everybody else seems to be present all the time, and I'm continually bombarded by emails and other things attacking me. And Charles particularly seems to always be present, and I don't know how he shuts off his world, and it freaks me out that I've got things coming at me all the time.
Todd, go ahead and close us off.
I'm just going to give this one. Pursue failure. Pursue failure. Fail more, fail often, and just give no care that you fail. And if you can do that, this alleviates more of the stress than I can possibly describe.
I agree with Todd 100%. I would say, though, that failure, it helps to analyze your failures afterwards and see if you can find marginal improvements. You don't have to fix everything the first day, but if you marginally improve over time, you get better and better. It's just how it works. TJ, you want to say one last word before we...
Yeah, if you don't fail, you're not trying hard enough. You can do something to never fail and never push your own boundaries. To push your boundaries, you have to try and reach and fail. And so, yeah, fail forward is the other thing. Like you said, analyze your failure. Try not to repeat the same mistake.
Yeah. And I just found it really comfortable. I don't have to fix everything tomorrow, but can I fix one thing? Can I fix two things? If I do that consistently, I will constantly improve. Douglas Carmichael is up next on the list of questions. I know that there are those that have used Blackmagic Design cameras when appearing on the panel. Would the output of a Blackmagic Design Pocket Cinema Camera 6K camera be compatible with Final Cut and other Mac video applications? I can answer that. And I say, yeah, absolutely. I've used it since the beginning. Carl, do you want to add things to it?
So it depends if you're shooting Blackmagic RAW or if you're shooting ProRes. If you're shooting ProRes, it'll work on pretty much any. So it'll work on Final Cut and work on DaVinci Resolve. If you're shooting Blackmagic RAW, but you want to work in Final Cut, then what you want to do is you can just use DaVinci Resolve and then just simply do a transcode, just output it as ProRes. So you can just take that Blackmagic Raw, set your LUT, and then just output it as ProRes. And then you can work
Carl's 100% right. There is some still blockade between Apple's software and Blackmagic Design's licensing, and I don't know where it is or what it is, but it's not a direct import. Go ahead, Charles.
Yes, remember like the HDMI out from the Pocket is only it's 1080p, it's 422, and then you can change your frame rates, but it's actually 10-bit. If you're doing a lot of post work, I would actually record to a T5. That way you could get full K resolution and all that stuff, and then you could actually do a lot more post work with some freedom.
Yeah, a lot of us who shoot with Blackmagic, I have a Blackmagic 6K, and I always use a T5 drive on it because, frankly, the 6K files are very big, and even most memory cards get chewed up real fast, and it's very inconvenient to have to swap them out. So that's usually one of the first add-ons that most people with 6K cameras get. I think we've covered that, so let's move on to JJ McKenna, Santa Venetia, California. When looking at the future of office hours content interface, are there enough devices to hear the various ways that the audio might stream to listeners and producers if office hours goes out in surround versus stereo? I think this is something that really Alex has to weigh in on because he's in charge of the downstream. He has the vision for where the show might go eventually. I know he's extremely interested in technologies like Dolby Atmos and beyond surround. So I think as this is his technological playground to a certain degree, it wouldn't surprise me if we get those kind of features earlier than other shows do, but he's the only one I think who really knows. TJ, you want to weigh in on it?
Well, if we're doing surround sound, then there are other devices that can play that surround sound, like Apple has their AirPods Pro and the newer headphones that Apple has now. There are a lot of Apple devices that are pushing the surround sound aspect of audio, in addition to like having a home theater type of setup in that case. So I'm not quite as familiar if any like mobile devices from Android or any other manufacturers have similar surround sound capabilities. So I know from the Apple side of things, there are a lot of devices that can replicate that surround experience.
Victor, do you want to weigh in?
Just that the good thing about Atmos is that it's going to give you an experience at the lowest common denominator. So if you have stereo, it won't matter if he's producing in surround. It'll meet your requirements. If you went out and bought a $2,000 pair of headphones that does surround, great. If you have AirPods Max, great. But if you just have stereo headphones or speakers, you're still good to go. Nobody's going to get less than they're getting today.
Yeah, that's really an interesting thing, that localization of all those and the collapsibility of the multi-positional audio, spatial audio into something that works for mono, stereo, quad, whatever. That's been a fascinating part of the technology. I do think they got that really right with the design. Richard, do you want to jump in on it?
Yeah, just from my perspective, there's obviously more consumer devices now that can do it. So it's starting, it's increasing. So why not be able to do it before anyone else?
The early adopter syndrome. We can like being out there on the edge sometimes. I know that office hours has been fabulous for learning about the leading edge. So at least you can process it before it arrives in your devices and you don't know how to operate them. Let's go to Gordon Lake in Los Angeles, California. His question is, as more projects move to the cloud, should production companies build cloud production expertise quickly in-house, or should they bring in companies that already have that expertise and develop in-house capabilities over a longer period of time? Boy, this is a tough question because that's about your business model, and their businesses of all sizes with all level of resources. Some people obviously are, we're one-man bands or one-woman bands, and you don't have a lot of options to bring in other people. Other bigger organizations do. TJ, you want to jump in on it? Then we'll go to Jason.
Well, I guess, yeah, that depends on your current need. I mean, if you have the need and it's immediate and you don't have the resources in-house, then your only option really is to hire outside. But if your need is farther out and you have the capability, then if your business plan, if it makes sense for your business to have that talent in-house, as opposed to hiring it out every time. That's where it makes sense to build your own talent in-house.
Jason and Rupert. Go ahead, Jason.
I can't tell you where things are at right now necessarily, but I can tell you I teach high school kids. I teach them film production. 3 to 5 years out, they will be doing this. So if you are planning on developing in-house, do it within the next couple of years.
Rupert, and then we'll go to Richard.
So the question was or, but it doesn't have to be mutually, doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. You can augment your internal expertise for a period of time, either with contractors or consulting firm to come in and help you gain that knowledge, training, whatever. It can be a blended approach.
Absolutely. And Richard, let's see. Richard, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just exactly what Rupert said. I mean, it doesn't have to be one or the other. If you're thinking about the future, do both, test the ground in one area and then move into it. Certainly, we've just invested in building a big in-building system, and it's kind of like, oh, maybe I should have done it in the cloud, saved a bit of money now, possibly. But we're also now looking at kind of how to use that as a at-home system. So we're now looking at kind of live view boxes that can broadcast back to our base as a main control room and then go back out again. And there's so many options in so many different directions. And it's just worth to poke at each.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder whether having more options is a blessing or a curse. We seem to have so many now out there. I keep hearing about new services and go, should I explore that or just leave it alone? Well, it's one of those may you live in interesting times curse things. Let's move on to Nigel DeSau on Austin, Texas. I'm interested in understanding Dante, so I've started the certification. Is there a minimum hardware to buy to begin to play with Dante virtual audio? Go ahead, Carl.
In theory, there isn't, because you can use a Dante virtual card, but that's essentially coming from something that is Dante. You've got the ordinate, like you've got the 2-channel in, 2-channel receivers, 2-channel transmitters. So this is like taking 2 XLRs and turning them into Dante. So there we go. That's USB to a Dante. So this will just simply ingest a Dante and put it into USB. So there's a few ways to do it. The best way to actually really play with it would be to buy yourself like a second-hand X32, like a rack even, with a card in it. And that way you'll actually have like a full digital mixer with a Dante card in it. And that'll give you the ability to actually mix and do mix minuses and all that kind of stuff. So I think secondhand X32 with a Dante card is a really good start there, maybe.
Great. Craig, you wanted to hop in on this?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's a great idea, the X32. But even just, and I know I'm in the minority in office hours, I like VIA. They do a bundle with the DVS virtual sound card and VIA. If you've got 2 computers already, using that as a way to start routing things and learn the controller software is a really good solution as well.
Great. We're going to slip next to Stan Chan's question, and I have to change 2 buttons here real quick. He's in Roseville, California, and Stan, who's a frequent questioner here, says, what would be your best setup for a mobile streaming setup that's portable and would work well with the M1 iPad Pro? How about a medium range setup as well, price-wise? Carl, go ahead.
A10 Mini Pro with a phone in the USB for streaming. So essentially you're using the phone tethered. This will allow you to stream to Restream, for instance, and then from Restream, you can Restream out to anything. So this is no computer in the mix. So this is simply your phone tethered, A10 Mini Pro, HDMI cameras in, no computer to fail. So there's no computer in the mix here. It's simply the A10 Mini Pro just simply has whatever streaming protocol you want to stream to, and you just hit stream on, the on button up top right hand corner, and that's it. So there's nothing to fail, and this is really portable. You can actually just leave it in your backpack, kind of. You don't want to be touching the buttons, but yeah, it's very portable, relatively cheap, way cheaper than an iPad Pro. So that would be my first option. My second option would be A10 Extreme ISO, doing the exact same thing.
Let's expand this a little beyond. What cameras would you suggest? I mean, we know that A10 minis do not take directly USB webcam type things. So what would be the minimum cameras you'd like to go with for that kind of streaming thing? Go ahead, Carl. Continue.
If it's a mobile setup, then I'd be using Filmic Pro on iPhones. The better iPhones would be the ones with a telephoto lens. So you actually have an optical telephoto if you want to get, zoom in without having to do digital zoom. That's because you're saying you want to be mobile. I'm a photographer. Just the weight of 2 cameras for me with the equipment is enough to break my back. And, I try to keep things light, and therefore you can use any phones essentially that have A clean HDMI out, iPhone with Filmic Pro is one. But yeah, any phones. You may have a collection of phones. You may have friends that are coming with you for this event and you can use their phones. So, and you just need one other phone to be the tethered phone.
And you just need the Lightning to HDMI connectors, which Apple sells, and they're inexpensive. And that's how you get it out. TJ, you want to add anything? And then we'll go to Rupert.
If you have the ATEM, like Carl suggests, keep in mind that the output on that is only 1080p. So if you had a cheaper, older, inexpensive camcorder, like I have one that I use for my over-the-shoulder shot, that can, if it can output clean HDMI, not all can, but some can, and that is a cheap, inexpensive alternative to getting your video in, as opposed to a more expensive iPhone type of device.
My VIX is hooked up, is it? No, I guess it's not. Oh, anyway, go ahead, Todd.
And just to piggyback on that, I use a couple of GoPros. You know, a GoPro 4 you could probably get $80 or something at this point. Clean HDMI comes straight out, and also or the 8. Don't get the 9, but the GoPro 8 as well, which is tricky in itself. Let's go with cheap. GoPro 4. Costs you nothing.
Rupert?
If you're in the iPad iOS world, would Cinemaker not be a good platform for this?
Does anybody here use Cinemaker? There are a lot of things about it I've always wanted to look at. And it's interesting to be able to switch iPhones into a single output, but I haven't had a chance to use it yet. Nobody, it doesn't look like anybody on this particular panel. So if you're interested in Cinemaker, maybe come back next time and maybe somebody here on the panel will have had direct experience with it. For now, we're moving on to JJ McKenna's next question from Santa Venetia, California. What transmitters do small drive-ins use to send the audio from movies to viewers in cars? Wait, they're using radio? They don't still have speakers on poles with wires that you can break when you drive off? I'm shocked. Go ahead, Carl.
So the last time I went to a drive-in, I actually asked this. They've got a 5-watt FM transmitter that they were using, and they had a particular frequency they were allowed to use. They had 2 screens, so they'd have 2 different frequencies, so you could tune your radio and just turn your head and watch the other movie if you didn't pay for it.
Be trippy to watch one movie and listen to another. That would be very odd. All right, I think we're moving on. Grant Whitehead, our friend from Adelaide, Australia, is up next, and he says, what are the great spatial audio tracks that show it off well? So has anybody consumed any spatial audio content? Carl, go ahead, and then Jesse.
So some of the classical stuff, the actual tracks that I think that really show it up, there's some real modern stuff. So like some stuff from, there's entire albums by The Weeknd. The more subtle stuff that I think really shows it off is there's 2 John Lennon albums. So the John Lennon albums are really interesting because the piano is actually wrapped right around you where John Lennon's dead center. So there's some subtle stuff, and then the more modern stuff, like I think The Weeknd has been, it's a little bit overproduced sometimes, but it definitely is surround, but it is a little bit overproduced. The more subtle stuff, I think the John Lennon albums are quite nice.
TJ?
I was listening to some of the classical selections, and some of them were not, moving the instruments around as such, but just made me feel like I was sitting in the concert hall itself. And instead of in my small, home theater living room, it was like, no, I'm in a big concert space, and just hearing the echoes coming around behind me and above me, it was really just a transformative experience of, I could shut my eyes and just imagine the 80-piece orchestra on the stage in front of me. And then I was listening to some of the more modern stuff from like Billie Eilish, which had, you could just tell, people like Phineas, her brother, are just really thinking on this, and it's like, okay, how can I really play with this and kind of get this into, and really this new surround mix and make it kind of interesting.
It's like they have a new instrument to play with. Jesse, go ahead.
So for me, on Apple Music, they have spatial audio playlists that are broken into genre. I personally like hip hop, so I was listening to that one, which was surprisingly amazing in spatial audio. There's also just pop. That was the other one I listened to that I really enjoyed. So of course, it's also dependent on the type of speakers you have, the setup you have, or the headphones you have. So I tried with my in-room speakers to use the Dolby 5.1 that I have, and it wasn't really working. But then when I put on the AirPod Max that do have the spatial audio, it was really upgrade in sounds. It's pretty impressive.
Nice. TJ, you want to pop back in before we move on? We've got a full second hour.
Some of the rock tracks, the thing that some of the mixes did was just took the stereo mix and just made it a little bit wider. They weren't going crazy with it when it was a little bit more subtle, and they just made the whole mix seem a little bit wider. I thought that was really successful on some of the older rock tracks.
Nice. Okay. Moving on. Dave Kaufman, Vancouver, BC. I recently had to mix a band and stream it through Zoom. Even with original sound on, it feels like I was kicking into a low threshold limiter. Is there any other setting other than high quality and original sound to try? Carl?
So yeah, you want to make sure you have high quality on. You want to make sure you have original. You want to make sure you have stereo on, because you'll get phase cancellation if you don't turn the stereo feature on in Zoom as well. You want to make sure you're not going in too loud. So if you go in too loud, there is a limiter in Zoom. So even if you have all this high quality stuff on, there is a limiter built into Zoom, and kind of like maybe a very soft compressor in there. But so you want to make sure you're not going in too loud. So we're okay here because we do -24, so none of us are going too loud. But if you're going in at -18, when the band is playing normally, when they finish, when they get loud, they maybe go into like -6. You just won't see it because they're only going there transiently. When that happens, a limiter will kick in, and that limiter may have a long release in Zoom. So just be careful of that. So where we sit is around -24. So -20 would be a bet with on a luff, on a long, but be careful to make sure that you're not going into Zoom too loud as far as the audio. I know they're a loud band, you may want them to appear loud, but you will hit Zoom's own limiters, which are uncontrollable to us.
Yeah, that's actually a whole topic unto itself. The standard appears, from my perspective, to be settling at -24. I know it's that way for some of the broadcast stations I deliver to, but it's been iffy, and I've seen a lot of different standards come in from radio stations, from television stations, from all sorts of things. And then there, of course, is the web, which kind of has it's kind of still the old Western, whatever rules the local sheriff allows is what the local sheriff allows kind of environment. It's been hard for me, just as a producer of content, to get everything right. And I'm hoping that the industry and SMPTE and some of these other big standard settings bodies can finally settle in and say, yeah, it's -24. That's it, done. I don't know if that's going to happen, but boy, it sure would make life easier for most of us who try to do things right. Fingers crossed. Let's move on. It looks like Gilberto in Santa Cruz, Bolivia is back with, can AWS be set up as an alternative to live use bonding? Or how are you all making sure that the internet bandwidth isn't an issue? Anybody doing constant AWS stuff? Go ahead, Rupert.
So not maybe exactly, but I know the Elemental platform can do some bonding. Not maybe in the regular box, but they do have some bonding solutions out there. Also, PepWave, you can host your own server-side solution for PepWave in the cloud if you wanted to. Also, check out 5gstore.com. I think they have a whole load of encoders that can do bonding as well.
Yeah, the bonded cellular space seems to have had a lot of, it seems to me, and I may be wrong about this because I don't play in that space a lot. Seems like there was development in the early days, then there was a fallow period where they didn't seem to push too many new technologies. And then now there seems to be more active development with trying to get bonded cellular to be a consistent, reliable thing. LiveView's still doing it, I think, as well as anybody, but there are other players. Richard, do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, just in the general space, Speedify is a really, really good option. We've used it before, and I know Guy has recommended it a couple of times. It's really excellent for bonding multiple signals. If you have one computer, you plug in a couple of different antennas to it. It can bond Wi-Fi and cellular, all different things.
You're still in the circumstance though where you have to buy multiple cards or signal phones or something and keep those maintained in order to get the multiple signals that are bonded. Yeah. I thought it was still basically the same technology. Douglas Carmichael's up next with which Blackmagic designed cameras would you recommend for a self-view camera? I know several panelists use the Pocket Cinema 6K or the 6K Pro. How are you mounting it to your screen, and how and when are you controlling it with or without access to the LCD? Let's see if I can cut to my overhead shot. And mine is behind a teleprompter that I'm pointing at right now. So if I switch back to the other shot, I am pointing right at my camera. It's mounted inside a teleprompter, and the Blackmagic 6K sits on a riser. I have a computer desk, as you probably saw from that other thing, that has a bridge on it. Whoops, that would be this shot. I have multiple levels. This is my desktop down here. I have a little Rain Design riser that brings my laptop up, and then the teleprompter is even another level up on top of that. So different rigs for different people. Let's go around the horn and see what everybody does. TJ, go ahead next, and then Carl, and then Jesse.
Okay, so for me, I have a Blackmagic 6K mounted on a Visa mount arm over the top of my monitor, and for controlling it, I can use the Blackmagic Designs camera has a ability to go in, and I can control the f-stop or the color temperature or the shutter speed if I want to make adjustments here from the iPad that connects wirelessly through Bluetooth to the camera.
Carl, was it next? I think Carl, then Jesse. So Carl.
So let's say one thing first. There's no vlogging camera that Blackmagic make, so there is no LCD that folds out. You can use a video assist and screw that on top of one of the quarter 20 holes and put the 5-inch video assist up the top, and that'll give you somewhat of a vlogging camera. As far as control of the camera, there are, as TJ showed, there's the app. A lot of the ways that a lot of the panelists will use is through the ATEM. So the ATEM software can control Blackmagic cameras, the pocket cameras with HDMI, and the Ursa cameras with the bidirectional converter. They can actually control it from the software or from the actual switcher itself. So the actual hardware switcher itself can do focus, can do iris, can do black level, and the software that comes with the ATEM can also control these things. Or you can go out and buy the big panel that can control 4 cameras.
And I know Alex also talks about the fact that one of the things that is a big positive about the Blackmagic is that if you're into larger zooms and things like that, the remote engineers can often talk to the camera and do that shading remotely. So it takes some of the pressure off of you. Jesse, you want to pop in, and then we'll go to Hasmic.
Yeah, sure. So when I got the camera, I mounted it to my desk with a Manfrotto arm that was about $60. And then to control it, I used an iPhone app that's made by a third party, but it can communicate with the camera via Bluetooth and will let you control focus and aperture and color balance, just about anything you'd want to. So that was a pretty good setup. And then I did buy a small HD 5-inch monitor to be able to see the footage that's coming out of it.
Hasmic, go ahead, then we'll go to Charles.
Yeah, as the newly sacrificial lamb on the altar of Blackmagic 6K, I've just slaughtered the sheep today, my first time. I have no light at the moment, but I didn't realize how heavy the camera is. I got a 2470 lens, Sigma lens. So I had to use quite a sturdy, tough Manfrotto tripod to feel quite secure about the camera. And that's my setup at the moment. So I don't have light at the moment, but the camera's in front of me. I did try Bluetooth Plus as an app on the phone to try and control the camera. I haven't played a lot with it, but that's more or less my entry into the Blackmagic circus.
Welcome to the club. We're going to go to Charles and then Nigel after that. Go ahead, Charles.
Welcome to the party, Hasmic. So I chose the 6K mostly because of the lens options that I can get now. So I have a Milvis size that's been cinemated, really just for work. Now I have mine sitting between my monitors right in the middle during that sliver, just so I can look like I'm paying attention when I'm looking to either side. So that's been my little trick. I don't control mine through the ATEM because I've gotten so used to controlling it when we may or may not have attached the camera to the side of a car. And I sit inside and I control it through the Bluetooth. So that's how I've done it. And, it's been the easiest way. When in live production doing that, I can change my, my exposure, change all that. I can change my tint, where if I fine tune the main things before I set up the camera on the jib or the car, whatever, then I can fine tune it from inside the car once we start moving or where I'm at. So that's what I'm using right now.
Nice. Nigel?
Yes, I made the classic office hours mistake, and I chickened out and went for the 4K. Now I wish I had bought the 6K. And part of the reason I went that way was because I didn't really have any lenses that fit. And I looked at the prices of the lenses, and I thought it would triple or double the price. And on the 4K, I could pick up pretty cheap secondhand lenses off Amazon and places. So the 4K works really nicely. The lens cost me like $50 on Amazon. I go in through the ATEM, and I have the Bluetooth. And what I'm trying to do is what Alex said months ago, which is every day I try and reset it up so I can learn it. It helps when Charles gives you a LUT, but it's a lot more difficult for a newbie to control than I think people understand. So learning and playing with it's a great response.
And Hasbek had another thought here. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was also tossing between 4K and 6K, 6K Pro. I think the type of lenses influenced my decision to go the 6K route with the Canon type of lenses. And then when it came between 6 and 6K, I just ignored the chicken and went straight for the 6K.
Charles?
And also remember, these cameras are designed to be cinema camera-ish. So these things, it's the body and then the accoutrement that comes along. It's usually more for production. So for us, we tend to overkill most things, but that's what we do for a living. But if you're just getting started, it might not be the easiest camera, but you will get to learn many things as you break everything.
I'm going to agree with that. And also, you cannot beat iPhones and things like that for a camera that is amazing that many people have. But when you get into actual camera bodies and the ability to choose lenses, you get into this realm of things like tilt shift lenses if you're doing some sort of architectural work or want special effects. And the lens breadth, the ability to find a particular lens to do a particular thing. Like I need to go really wide, and you can get down into 12 millimeter lenses and things like that. Or I have something that's a half a mile away and I've got to see it, and you can go to 400 or 600 millimeters and do that kind of thing. So that classic library of glass that's out there, particularly for rent, because almost every major city has a photo specialty store, and they have plenty of glass in both Canon and Nikon that you can go rent a lens for $100 for a 3-day weekend and get a specialty shot taken care of. That's the one thing where the iPhone kind of approach still isn't quite up to par. Go ahead, Jesse.
So totally agree with you, Bill. And even though before I was praising the quality of the iPhone camera in video mode compared to the Blackmagic 6K, the iPhone has a lot of drawbacks if you're trying to use it for something like Zoom conferencing at a high level. There are apps out there that theoretically let it work, but the problem is you don't have full control. You can't do things like soft background blur. That's done in computational photography when you take a still picture in portrait mode on the phone, but that doesn't work for live video. And you can get a phone call during your live session, and that's going to mess up the whole camera. So I don't regret the purchase of the Blackmagic. It's an amazing camera, and a lot of it has to do with the curve to get good at it. Once I get from Charles, who's generously offered his LUT to everybody, once I get that LUT, I'm going to reset up the camera, and I'm sure I'm going to look a lot better. The other reason I stopped using it, 2 comments. One was from Chris Fenwick, who thought that I look. So I'm using right now a Sony RX100. It's a 1-inch sensor. It's about an $800 camera. I kind of retired it because it's an older model, and I gave it to my dad, but then I asked for it back once I bought a capture card before I had the Blackmagic. But the truth is I prefer, and it's a personal choice, but the look, the color spectrum that comes out of the Sonys than I do the Black Magic. And this is as a non-super user like a Charles. This is as somebody that I'll fiddle with it for half a day to try and get this Sony, which was also difficult to get to work without all the on-screen, to get a clean HDMI out of it because it wasn't built for it, was a half a day pursuit. But I prefer in Chris Fenwick, who's an editor who has a very keen eye, when I switched from this to the Black Magic, and again, I didn't have the Charles LUT, he was criticizing, he said I look like I'm modeled in clay. And then, you know, a side note is my mom watches this show with my dad in the background. They're not even in the peanut gallery. They're the super peanut gallery. She told me I was looking sunburn and worrying about me. So I'm like, that's it. I'm going back to the Sony.
The criticism from your mother will definitely change your behavior, won't it? Hazmat, go ahead.
Yeah, you know, when the pandemic started, we did a lot of COVID videos at the hospital, and we used iPhones. And during the medical event as well, the pre-recording of the lectures, we did it in iPhone. And then about 2 weeks ago, we went with a Black Magic to the hospital to record 2 procedures. And we're doing the same event in 2 weeks' time, and the lecturers came to the office. And you know, the difference it's made in a post-production workflow. So we've recorded everything in log, and the editing team working in Final Cut Pro are just amazed at the potential they have in the editing process by managing all the different LUTs as they go around coloring and producing the video. But the best of all was that the professor in charge of the department, when he looked at us, he says, "Oh, I see you've really upped your game. So now we're going to have to pay you a little bit more." So to go with Charles's view, it just makes you a little bit more professional. Instead of coming and lugging your little iPhones, it just doesn't gel.
Yeah, that does seem to happen. I remember the first time I really shot something with the Blackmagic 6K and came back and processed it. I was kind of like, wow, that does look really good. And it's just they keep doing research, and they keep putting that research into the machines that they give us. And the fact that those 6Ks are down to $2,000, I mean, that's stunning. I couldn't have dreamed in my earlier career of getting a camera that had that much capability for those kind of dollars. It was just out of the realm of possibility. I mean, the $15,000, $30,000, $60,000 Ikegamis didn't look as good as some of these $2,000 cameras now. It's crazy. Let's keep moving on. Carmi Veinzevek is back. And he asks, what are people's favorite sports tech sites? I love DCRainmaker.com. Any others? Sports tech sites. I wonder what Carmi's looking for. Is it, because sports is a pretty big candidate here. Nigel, you want to tackle it?
So I'm not really sure I know the answer, but I will tell you that the MLB site probably has the best use of technology I've ever had. And if you're an MLB fan, the fact that you can listen to your local radio and watch your local television broadcast of your favorite team is an amazing piece of sync.
Yeah, and since this is a worldwide show, that would be American Major League Baseball is MLB here. TJ Asher, go ahead.
For sports production, there's sportsvideo.org is the site that covers a lot of sports production, talks about, television, trucks, I mean, all the behind the scenes kind of things of what's going on for sports production. They go in, there's a lot of in-depth articles on how did they do the Kentucky Derby? How did they do the last year when the NHL did that thing in Lake Tahoe where they had the arena set up next to the lake and they had drone cameras and stuff. So there was a lot of that kind of information there.
And sports is such a variety. One of my friends, Peter, does the Tour de France. And you can imagine the logistics of shooting something like that happens over multiple days, over multiple countries, practically. I mean, it's an incredibly long course. They have motorcycles with live cameras. It's just a massive undertaking to cover something like that. And there are others like Formula One and things like that have the same kind of challenges. So it's a huge, that or a figure skater. They're just two different things. And props to all the professionals out there working to bring those things to us, because I know people just love watching that content, and they've gotten it refined to an amazing degree these days. Particularly things like he mentioned Major League Baseball, but that in NFL and the technology they use to explain how the game is unfolding, using things like the first down markers and things like that we never had access to when I was a kid playing around in sports for the first time. It's really pretty stunning what they've done. Let's move on. We're at Ronnie Hofsey of Tromsø, Norway. New mixer recommendations for our studio converting to Dante. We need 14 to 16 inputs, 12 IEM, IFB, and Unity intercom. No live bands or music. Been looking at the Yamaha TF or QL, ANH, Allen & Heath, SQ5 or 6, Behringer Wing, to mention a few. So Carl has some thoughts on that. Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, as we mentioned before, the Behringer Wing is actually quite a good choice if you're going in new. It does have the Dante card that you can put in the back. I've got here the S16. This is the stage box, a breakout box. So because it just gives you more inputs and more outputs and gives you a bit of choice of where you want it. If you're going to a studio, this will be fixed, and it gives you a bit of choice of where to rack mount your inputs and outputs. But this is a very economical solution that will expand with your studio as well.
Okay, moving on. Oh, wait, I somehow missed one up at the top. JJ McKenna from Santa Venetia is there a way to auto tag questions in Mukana to default based on the time the question is input? TJ, you want to discuss that?
I bet there isn't right now. I know there isn't right now, but given Chris Peterson's ability, by tomorrow, who knows, there might be.
The timing is interesting, particularly in the system that Alex has created here, where you can vote up questions. One of the things I notice is that sometimes questions that are interesting, but not as interesting as earlier questions, get handled later in the time, and it can be often a significant amount of time between that question being asked and put into the Mukana queue and us getting around to answer it. And that's just purely based on the fact that this is a highest vote gets priority question system, which I think works to keep the most people in the audience engaged with the most questions the fastest. It seems to do a really good job of that, but that's an artifact of it. Let's go around. Jeffrey Powers, Rupert McCrae, then TJ and Craig. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Just really quick, based on the information I know about Alex, my guess is it's never going to have a default tag, because he wants you to be aware of what tags are in there instead of just give you a generic tag to go to.
Okay, Rupert.
Yeah, my preferred behavior would be for that to be a required field. You just have to tag it before you can submit it. Auto based on time would be risky for me. I would think in general, because I often submit questions like first thing in the morning while I'm having my coffee for the show later. So that might be for any hour.
Yeah, I don't remember the order I said. It's either Craig or TJ. Let's do Craig first, and we'll go to TJ last.
Oh, sorry, I didn't have my hand up. But
oh, okay, never mind then. Then TJ, you get the token.
Just want to take this as an opportunity to remind people to tag your questions, because tagging is going to be extraordinarily important as we move forward, because where Bill is looking at his questions, he can sort them by the tag, so he sees the ones for the particular hour that is being discussed, and at some point untagged questions may get left behind.
Yeah, that's actually true. And I can tell you, for the first months here, having a really popular second hour question, so that the first question on the current topic was 7 questions deep in my queue, was an interesting thing to manage. I was constantly trying to scroll through that to find the next question I'd have to go to, and they've improved that substantially. So we're constantly getting there. I think everybody's taking a shot at that. So we're going to go to Douglas Carmichael next, and he says, I remember going to a jazz band concert where they'd use mics on groups of instruments and not mics on individual instruments. Wouldn't you get more control over the mix if you individually mic'd everything, particularly in monitors? And so let's do Craig and Carl. So Craig, take it away first, and then we'll go to Carl.
You might get more individual control, especially for people's monitors if they're doing in-ears. But you also have limitations. It might be a number channel count, the amount of availabilities of mics. Also, there is a quality you get out of miking groups of instruments as a whole. Like most people think of a drum kit as one instrument, and how you approach miking it changes when you think that way versus thinking of it as individual instruments.
Carl?
So there's a big difference between miking for recording and miking for sound reinforcement. This sounds like they were miking for recording. Most jazz bands don't need in-ears. They're going to be in a smaller club unless they're not going to be in an arena generally. So they're going to be able to hear each other. And a lot of the instruments in a jazz band are quite loud. And they position the instruments accordingly. So the bass player will be close to the rest so they can hear them. So they usually play quieter. So they're not, so the bass player can come out, double bass player can come out. So most likely what you're seeing was they were mic'd for recording. Miking for recording, as Craig says, you don't necessarily want to spot mic every instrument because you'll get phase. If you've got like 3 trumpeters and you've got 3 mics, then you're going to get phase between those. It's better to mic them with just maybe one stereo pair, an A-B pair. But yeah, there's a lot of miking techniques, and tone meisters around the world will have very different ways of miking bands for recording, orchestra, jazz bands, those kind of things. But it's most likely it was mic'd up for recording with maybe some sound reinforcement from probably double bass only.
I always think of it as when I've talked to people who are particularly in things like barbershop quartet and things like that, their blend is something they work on as a ensemble to get the various things balanced correctly. And that would be more, we're all aiming at one spot to try to make it perfect there, as opposed to each person recording. Now, you do it either way, but I just think there's some things that traditionally some recordists like that, to preserve that the instrumentalists or the singers are working on their own blend of voices in real time rather than isolating everything and mixing in post. But who knows? There's as many ways to record music as there are people who do it, I would imagine. Let's move on. Douglas Carmichael's next. And he says, how do you protect against being Zoom bombed? TJ and then Rupert and then Charles.
So there's a couple things you can do to help yourself out. First, if you have something, make people register for that meeting or webinar or whatever it is in Zoom, so that they have to go into Zoom, register with an email address in order to get the link to that, so that people can't just drop in on you. Have somebody set up your meeting so that you are allowing people, that you have to admit people to come in if it's a meeting that you've sort of given an invite out, to make sure only people you are expecting to come through the door come through the door. So yeah, just don't put it out there for everybody to just pop in.
Rupert?
Yeah, so when it comes to registration, that is a step that can help, but of course people can set up burner accounts, so it can always be something that make it through. This used to be a bigger problem than it is now, although it still is a problem. Zoom now requires that you at least have one of their 3 various measures in place, but still things can happen. Like TJ says, having a green room or vetting people as they come in can help, or a waiting room, but also have co-hosts, people who are well practiced and skilled at quickly muting people, getting them out. Have a team working with you to help keep the thing policed.
Charles?
This is definitely an Alex question, but TJ and Rupert have covered it. I would say follow the steps that you do to get on office hours. There are multiple steps along the way that deter most people, because most bombers want to get in and get out. They're not trying to hang around, right? So the more steps along the way to actually register, be admitted in, will actually get rid of 99.9% of most things that bombers are trying to do.
Yeah, if you come here early and you see it, we even names we know, we kind of demand unveil your camera and let us see who you are before you go through the last gate. TJ, you want to add something?
Yeah, and if you enable Zoom chat, because you can't clear the Zoom chat history, have somebody who is a co-host have a predetermined block of whatever that they can post in and just clear whatever nefarious things may get put into chat, or disable chat completely.
Okay, and Douglas Carmichael's up next. Oh no, he's saying Hasmuk had a hand up. Sorry, Hasmuk, let's do you, because we've still got 9 questions and 45 minutes, actually 30 minutes if we do the 15-minute mic checks.
Correct. We're stopping at 15 to the hour, I believe.
Okay,
Alex.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, just very quickly for the medical event, I had a session with the participants first, so we can see who they are and their photos are on. And then we got them to sign the terms and conditions of it. And part of the terms and conditions was I'll have my camera on at all times. I will put my first name, last name. And then in Discord, I will put my first name, last name, and I'll have my profile picture. And I understand I'll be booted out of Zoom or booted out of Discord if I don't follow these following requirements. So I made it a terms and conditions of participating in a medical event. And we turn off the chat part of it. And then as they come into the meeting, we just put them into a green room and then we check them out. So that's really part of the security setup.
Modern life. Here you go. All right. Douglas Carmichael's up next with a question. He says, what brand of UPS on an uninterruptible power supply would you recommend? I currently have an Eaton 5P UPS, but I'm looking at the APC Smart UPS for the rack I want to build. So Rupert had his hand up first, then we'll go to Charles. Go ahead, Rupert.
So personally, I've always gone towards APC for any critical or production application. The parts are widely available. They've got a great warranty. They also have a good ecosystem of products. So if you you'll find that they have complementary things that you may use in other parts of your system. You can also grow up pretty well with APC. They have great consulting if you need that, or pre-sales. So you can grow in all kinds of directions with APC.
Okay, that should take care of that. We'll move on to Ronnie Hofsøy of Tromsø, Norway. And he says, what would be a cheap and easy to use as a Dante-enabled IFB in-ear headphone amplifier? 6 to 8 channels. We currently use Unity for crew, but I think would have something cabled for the guest. No budget for wireless, sure PSM yet. Richard, do you want to chat about that?
Yeah, we've had great success with the T-Bones on Thomann. It's available in Europe. They've been just really quite cheap, quite reliable, and have worked really well in our venue. Just we've got a couple of them and they can go on the same channel for easy.
Jason, I'm sorry, there's nobody else with a hand up. So we'll move to Jason Sipe. Marietta, California. Ken Jones' post in Discord last night made me take a look at the old office hours footage this morning. I'm sorry for somebody who came in and looking horrible in my early days. Sorry I had to go through that. I noticed that the lighting and gradient has shifted quite a bit amongst the panelists. Our cinema looks becoming the new standard for conferencing. I'm going to address, Alex said from almost day one here, that your Zoom telepresence or your telepresence on whatever service, whether you're using WebEx or Teams or whatever, is essentially the equivalent of how you dress to go to the office now. And if you would not have shown up in your office before in jeans and a t-shirt, coming in on your laptop camera with the laptop microphone is kind of this era's version of that. Doesn't mean you can't do it. And maybe your content that you're contributing is so important that takes a back seat. That certainly could happen. But in general, I think I agree with him 100% that the better your camera look, the better your microphone, the more seriously you are taken as a participant in any video conference you go into. So the extremes we talk about here on office hours, it was all really for a purpose. We didn't do this just because we were embarrassed to look a little goofy or something. We did this because we really thought it had an impact on us being taken seriously in this new communications medium. I think he was 100% right about that, and I know other people agree with me. Let's go to TJ and Charles.
So for specifically, I agree with everything Bill said 100-fold. For some lighting, like right now, I have what I would consider more of a cinematic light going on, just the way I have it, more directional. And that's just for this show. If I'm in a regular business meeting, I bring on this other light, which kind of takes away the dramatic look a little bit, just to change the light a little, so it's not quite so dramatic and I'm like, ooh, an imposing figure in the meeting, as it were. But absolutely having a clean look, clean sound can dramatically raise your perceived level of professionalism in a meeting. I was in a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and I was in with essentially this setup, and there was another person in who had some one of those fake backgrounds going on, and every time that person would move, like part of their head would get cut off, and it was really bad. And eventually that person turned their video off when they realized how bad they looked compared. So yes, this is the suit and tie of the 21st century.
Charles, go ahead.
Yeah, I second everything that Bill and TJ said. From the beginning, once I started to see what was happening in office hours, I quickly started to step up my game, because the human psyche, the way that you interact with people, it's just how we're wired. Right? So you have to pay attention to those things. You can't ignore them and run against the current, you could say. But I've had many experiences. Even last week, I was on a call with the CEO of a company and some other people trying to do a production, and the assistant got in trouble for allowing him to get on a call with somebody that looked much better than him on a call. Now, that might be petty, but we are all human. And as Bill said, this is how you are now interacting with the world. And these videos are being recorded, so they are in perpetuity. They will be out there. So this is how you will be seen by society, you could say. So yeah, if you can step up your video, step up your audio in particular, and I think you will give yourself the best foot forward. I've gotten jobs because I come into a meeting looking like I know what I'm talking about. So,
Craig, go ahead.
I just want to second all of that again. The experience with office hours just makes me think. It always thinks whenever I see anybody now with a goofy virtual background, it just reminds me of the Simpsons episode where Homer Simpson starts doing it with his own webpage and has like a million flashing GIFs and everything. It just looks silly and very outdated and stuff now. So,
Jesse and then Chad. Go ahead, Jesse.
I haven't seen that episode, but I love the Simpsons reference. There was one episode where Homer designs a car. It's hysterical. You guys should see that. But back to the question, I think even in non-professional settings, in social settings, it makes a huge difference. And the example I'll give is when we do family FaceTimes, the audio is so different and people have bad setups, and my wife does not want to be on because it's just too psychologically disturbing to her. I mean, she'll be on for a few minutes, but she can't stay on. And it's because if your audios are not at consistent levels in particular, it is, one person's blowing out the ear, the other person that you might want to listen to, you can't hear. These things are really, in this new way of communicating and gathering, they're really important for all settings.
Chad, then Jason real quick, and then Mark, and then we'll move on because we're actually got 7 questions left, or no, 9 questions left, and we're getting out of time. Chad?
To reinforce that this isn't just for production purposes, in my day job, I'm a programmer, and people in my line of work are becoming increasingly work from home employees. And so we're meeting in Zoom, we're meeting in Teams and other tools like that, and out of sight, out of mind. You end up becoming far more disconnected from your coworkers and your peers when you're afraid to turn on the camera. And I take a great deal of joy every time I go into one of these meetings with my peers and I get people saying, man, how do you get your camera to look so good? It's nice. I stand out in that way, and I think that's fantastic.
For a good reason. Jason, and then Mark, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, going back and taking a look at the old footage, there was a lot of like virtual backgrounds, but there was a lot of key light. I noticed that like now, if we take a look at everyone's image on the panel, most everyone has a more dramatic lighting. And I've noticed that at least for me, when I've come in with the more dramatic lighting, I have been taken more professionally. So I was just wondering if you guys noticed that and just started doing that a lot more. And it seems that most people have.
Well, there was an office hour of era of ring lights. A lot of us came on early with big ring lights. We kind of all looked like we were sitting in front of a makeup mirror for a little while. We kind of got out of that pretty quickly, but I noticed that and it's kind of gone. Let's see, was there somebody other than Charles who had a hand up before? But let's go to Charles until somebody else raises a hand.
Yeah, the cinematic look is essentially the best way that film has found to tell a story and draw the audience in. So we are naturally making our way there, unknowingly or knowingly. That's where we're headed. And for example, I want to say Jim looks like he's in a film right now. right? Like his look and his separation of tone and color, that's what you would, exactly, that's what you would find in a film. It's like there's no blown out highlights, the darks are there, but there is detail, right? That's essentially what you would find in a film. So I think it looks great.
Absolutely. TJ, you want to toss in something?
I can't remember who mentioned audio. So important. The how people sound is Jesse. That is the critical thing to making sure that you are perceived well and just not annoyed by somebody else in the meeting.
Nigel?
Yeah, I can watch bad video. I cannot listen to bad sound.
I think you're not alone in that. And Alex is back. Alex, hi.
I'm
Hope
back.
Everything worked well.
We survived it. Events. So anyway, sometimes delegation doesn't work as well as you think it will. Anyway, let's go. Let's jump to the next question.
Yeah, Jesse's up next from Los Angeles. How's it been going with your Apple AirTags? My experience has been a total fail. My daughter Emily, I can't tell, wanted me to bring this up.
Go ahead, Charles.
So I did just get them a couple of days ago. I haven't had any time, and the mixed reviews that I've seen from certain friends has been interesting. Some love them, and some have had the same experience that Jesse has had, where they can't get it quite to work. So hopefully in the next couple of days when I have some free time, I'll get to play with these.
Mine worked fine. I can see them fine. They just don't make very much noise. so if you turn on the where is it, it's really hard to find. That's the one thing that with the tiles is they made enough noise I could hear it in the whole house. And with these ones, I have to get a lot closer. Go ahead, Jesse.
Yeah. So the timing is perfect because my wife just found this. But I have 2 AirTags. This one's been missing for the last week, and every day I've tried to find it. And my daughter, that's her job. She loves it. She borrows my phone and she tries to find the AirTags. The first day I bought it, I was hiding it around and she could usually find it. But the one time I really lost it, which is a few weeks ago, we have not been able to find it. And it's in the house. I don't even use these keys for anything unless I'm locking up this office. So I can tell you, there's this bad experience. And the other is, yesterday, my wife said, so I got this alert that you've been tracking me. Oh. And so the other AirTag is Amelie. She has it on her backpack and she takes it to school. And when I pick her up, I can kind of see where she is on the campus. So I don't know what black magic's going on in the background, but my wife picked up my daughter yesterday. And I guess that little AirTag has not been by me for a while. So she got some alert that Jesse Schwartz has been following her. So she's like, right. Did you put that AirTag on me? And it took us a while. I thought it was this one.
It's basically if it's near another phone for a prolonged period of time, I don't know exactly how long, and it's away from you for a prolonged period of time, it tells whatever phone is there that can see it that you're being tracked. It's a safety procedure that they have there, but yeah, it's a little weird. Go ahead. Good, Jesse, and then we'll go to Jim.
But okay, so back to the problem with this one. What we found out, because my wife just found it 10 minutes ago, in my daughter's overalls in her bedroom in the drawer. So my daughter was playing with it. She took it. The signal, whatever you chip, could not point me there. We're just going around in circles on the wrong floor. We tried it from the upper floor. It didn't find it. So, and the sound is not audible when it's in that type of a situation. So it did nothing for me.
It's much, much quieter. I would say probably 75% quieter than the tile, which is part of the problem. Go ahead, Jim, and then Carl.
Yeah, on the inability to hear, we have a particular pet in the house that has now earned its keep because when you kick one of these things off, it automatically goes to wherever the sound is coming from. So,
yeah, good, Carl.
If you've got the ability to use a newer device like an iPhone with the U1 chip. If you're using an iPhone without the U1 chip, you're going to be out of luck as far as finding it, like in the house. It will use Bluetooth. It will try to use Bluetooth to do that, but the U1 chip is kind of required to do that zeroing in.
My phone has a U1 chip.
Oh, yeah. It's next question.
Next question comes from Carmi. And he asks, what of the new user features introduced to WWDC are most interesting to people? For example, not from developers' perspective, but just from users' perspective.
Yeah, go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, I'm really looking to get this handoff thing working between my Macs and my iPad, and I've been trying for 3 days, and I still can't seem to make it work.
It's not quite universal yet.
I mean, I think the spatial audio stuff is pretty exciting. You know, I know that wasn't really I mean, it's released. They released it this week, but I think that has been one of the things I've been most excited about. And of course, the photogrammetry for me. Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, the return of target display mode to the iMac via AirPlay.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of the sharing stuff, I don't think it solves what I was trying to solve, you know, with lots and lots of people being able to watch the same thing together. But I do think some of those sharing modes could be really interesting for collaboration. Yeah, go ahead, TJ.
The ability to maybe start a FaceTime session not in an Apple device could be interesting.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
I'm really interested to see what happens with universal control and how many more people start buying more Apple devices because they just want their stuff to all work together. So that's what I would like to see going forward.
Yeah. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, I've noticed that DaVinci Resolve 17.2.1 on Mac OS 11.4 stops playback when I pull down a menu, but catches up as shown in this video. And he's got a video link there. When I let go of the menu, Final Cut doesn't. Is this a bug or is it normal behavior?
Go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, so for me, it's not a bug. It's a finishing tool. So if you're looking for a menu, you're not looking at the screen and you might miss something. So I particularly, if I'm going to go to a menu, I hit pause. I don't let it play. Once I let something go to a client, that's it. Like there's no coming back. So I actually prefer it stopping and let me go to a menu where I'm not paying attention. Then I miss something and I'm going to pay for that later.
Yeah. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, when you deploy audio systems for outdoor film screenings, do you EQ the system to the cinema standard X curve or in the same way or as other content?
Yeah, go ahead, Carl.
So if you're doing an outdoor film screening using a PA system, so generally you can use a spectrum analyzer on a PA system to try to get a flat response. You want a flat response if you're going into the ether of outdoor venues.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, I've been enjoying working with Resolve, but I've noticed that playback freezes when I pull a menu down in Mac OS. That's same thing.
We had that thing, yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that. Carmi Weinswig says, what is the most interesting new developer features from WWDC?
Somehow we have some doubling up there.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. All right, let's try this one. Douglas Carmichael. The FCC mentioned that high schools and colleges can host low-power terrestrial TV stations. Wouldn't there be challenges finding and keeping qualified staff on the school district's budget, as well as enforcing standards of professionalism?
Go ahead, Rupert.
I'll go ahead, but is this an EDU question maybe?
No, we can keep on talking about it. It's okay. Kind of halfway in between. Go ahead.
Sure. So obviously these stations are low power, so the risks involved are lower than big broadcast. And when it comes to these sort of things though, if, for example, they were causing interference to some nearby system, that would get reported and then investigated. That's kind of how that gets taken care of itself. In terms of content, in education environments, all it takes is for some parent to hear something inappropriate, that'll get reported, that'll get taken care of. Equipment might be calibrated by an external party. And if it comes to operating professional standards, that actually might be part of the curriculum. So they're trying to teach themselves how to do it correctly.
I have to admit, I don't understand why you do it. like for students. I mean, Jason can jump in on that. I don't know why students. I don't even know if they know how to get a terrestrial signal. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I was going to say, even just from a teacher perspective, being a younger gun in the industry, it would be difficult for me to try and do a low powered terrestrial venue. What we've noticed is that if there are low powered terrestrial TV station venues, sections of those have been cordoned off or whatever to set up more for video and virtual conferencing, kind of like what we're doing with Zoom. And so I've noticed that a lot of school districts are kind of starting to go and push in that particular direction. It's not just having like a small room where teachers can come in and kind of record their own stuff. It really is now becoming more of a web conferencing type feature. Or if they are pushing out broadcast to stuff for like YouTube or anything like that, it's nothing overpowering. Most school districts haven't caught up to that point from my vantage point and my perspective so far.
Yeah, I think that it would be. There are schools that are doing their own video production. I know here in the Bay Area, San Leandro High School has a whole multimedia studies. They got a huge grant. And they have a studio, and the students are doing regular broadcasts out of it. And they're definitely training them. They've got some folks that used to be in public stations, as well as the teachers that are really kind of moving them forward in that area. But I don't. I couldn't, if my kids did that, I couldn't pick it up. I don't have anything set up. I do have a home run that has been recommended, but I haven't even gotten it set up yet. Go ahead, Rupert.
Yeah, I toured several colleges last year. They all had broadcast radio stations.
Yeah, radio, I think makes more sense. Here's the funny thing about radio is that if you're playing music as a college station, there's, ASCAP and BMI, if depending on how it works out. The rules for streaming audio, music specifically, is really complicated and expensive, and there's not a lot of ways around it. So, I think that the part of why Apple Music and Spotify and all those have done really well is because that broadcast was completely kneecapped, a decade ago or 2 decades ago. And the radio or the online music industry was trying to not have it become a thing, or they wanted to cash in on it way more than that was due. And so as a result, they just kind of killed that part of the industry off because of the costs involved with streaming it. If you're not a terrestrial, so there's a reason to do radio broadcasts, because if you're streaming it with the radio broadcast, I think there's a different set of rules. If you're only streaming over the internet, it gets really expensive really fast. So that's part of the problem. Next question.
Aaron Hulsledge of Durham, North Carolina. What's the best way to learn how to produce content in Dolby Atmos? Go ahead, Carl.
So Dolby, I believe about a week ago, put up a new web page with a whole new video series on how to produce Dolby Atmos in Logic. So I can put the link in Makana.
Yeah, that'd be great. Next question.
Looks like it's also really a second hour, but we can take a shot at it here. I've noticed that many government advisory committees skew to those with master's or doctoral degrees versus bachelor's. I've heard many graduate level classes and seminars can be 4 to 6 hours plus long. Is the lifestyle that demanding at that level of education?
I'm sorry. I'm just trying to figure out. I didn't even.
He's saying basically,
I just don't see it in the back end. I don't know where you read that from.
It's in.
You just put extra words, I think. Okay. Anyway, go ahead. Go ahead. Anyone? Go ahead, Jason.
It depends on what you mean by demanding. A lot of master's and doctoral programs really are a lot about writing and thesis and statements and so on and so forth. So you have to do a lot of research. It's more research than it is actual development. At least I've noticed, that's what I've noticed on my end. In my case, when I was asked to go be a coordinating principal and stuff and do administrative work for the county out here, I kind of declined it, mostly because I didn't want to just invest the time into doing something that I didn't necessarily see as being applicable. Now, it might be applicable for a bunch of other people. But in my particular case, doing the 4 to 6 hours a night, as Douglas is saying there, right after you just got done working an 8-hour day, was just not a thing that I wanted to do at the time. And so when you say demanding, it's demanding in the fact that you have to coordinate a lot of rules and regulations along with people. The technical side of things isn't necessarily as demanding, I've noticed.
Go ahead, Charles.
I agree with Jason. I have found that like the higher up in education, like for example, when I was getting my master's, it was less practical doing and more theory and writing papers, which for certain fields I understand, but for most of the things that I'm interested in was a conflict of interest. And that led to a lot of issues where you had a lot of people that could speak about something, but nobody could do anything.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
so,
and I think that within the educational field, within the research field, within the government field, I think that that's a crutch that they use because they don't have any other way to measure other people. And that's become something that's an accepted crutch for them to look at. Well, they went through that much trouble, and so you kind of get you in the door and that allows them to sort. So it's not that it is a lot of work, and it is a lot of thinking through those things. And I think that can sort people out. And there's some positions that you just don't have access to unless you have one of those degrees. I think in our field, I don't think it's particularly useful. In our field, the biggest thing is doing it and discussing it. This is what we're doing every day. I mean, because you're in the middle of it all, you're learning how to do it, and then you're talking to other peers about what that means. And that's going to end up with people who are operationally more effective. I think that we generally find with students who have mostly just gone through school and not done as much production, that we have to we call it unlearning. We have to kind of uneducate them to actually have them be useful again. Because they have a lot of theory that's not applicable. And so there's a lot of things that make sense in your head that just don't make sense in the field. And and this is the case in many fields. I think I've talked in the past about a friend of mine who couldn't afford school, so they went into machining, and then got a mechanical engineering PhD in mechanical engineering, while machining. That made them lethal, literally, like they were for where they work. But that is because they actually understood what they were theorizing about. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, about a decade ago, I was looking at University of Washington's PhD and MA program for their communications department, and I'm looking at it right now, and it says that mostly what you'll be learning in the PhD field will be principles of intellectual and cultural pluralism, interdisciplinary innovation through collaboration and public scholarship. So really, it is mostly more about theory than it is about practical application.
Which will make you great at dinner parties. Next question.
Carmi Vancevic is up next with. Sorry, question was about sites that cover technology and use in sports. Oh, he's reflecting back on that confusion. Yeah. Bike computers auto follow.
I guess I missed that one, so I'm still more confused.
Let's move on, shall we?
Next question.
Yeah, Mark Giuliani of Alexandria, Virginia says, will cameras with mirrors, the Canon 5D Mark IV, shut down after being on for a certain length of time when used for videos? I'm using a dummy battery.
Go ahead, Carl.
So I'm also using a 5DSR that has a mirror and a dummy battery. I think my my record on office hours for continuous broadcast into office hours is about 8 hours. So I can tell you can go 8 hours without not a problem.
Tested that far.
So from the 5D Mark III onwards, the shutters required power to open, but then it doesn't require power to stay. And then it requires power to close. Before that, the 5D Mark II and before that, it required power to keep the shutter open. So essentially, it was using like an electromagnet to keep it open. So because of that change they did between the Mark II and the Mark III and the 5D and the other series that correspond to it, you don't have so many problems with that because they knew it was going to go into video. The original 5D Mark II was not really a video camera. They just had a video feature. 5D Mark III onwards knew that the shutter would be open for a long time, so they changed the way the shutter mechanism works. And the newer cameras, like what you have, the 5D Mark IV, has a quiet shutter mode as well. So it doesn't slap as hard as well. So it does have these modern shutters. As far as as far as worrying that it'll close, I know when you take the power away, the shutter does close, but that's part of the system of the camera. It's designed to do that. It's not going to stay open unless you actually go into the settings and say, leave the sensor open when I turn the camera off so you can clean your shutter. There is a setting for that, of course. But yeah, generally I've gone 8 hours. I know people use these as like witness cams in the corners. They use like using like a DSLR and they just put it up there for 12 hours, like at a concert or something on a remote head. So I haven't heard any problems. It's more to do with the shutter wearing down after 70 shots. My camera's taken over 500,000 shots and it's still going strong. So I'm quite happy with that.
That's great. All right. If you're an educator, please raise your hand. I know we're moving to the 9 o'clock schedule. So we had plenty of time for this. And we also have plenty of time for the mic checks and plenty of time to start on time. So that's been the goal there as we start to move that forward. So go ahead and raise your hand there. We're going to go ahead as we do this. We'll close up our YouTube stream. So if